Hi, my name's Emily Rose Adams. Welcome to Presently Presents.
Even though I like watching the news, it's not really always focused on young people or people from diverse backgrounds. And I was like, you know what, I'm fed up. Maybe I can try and, see what I can do. One thing that has definitely helped me when it comes to feeling more at ease is I have amazing mentors that have kind of, if it wasn't for my mentors, I don't think I would have had the confidence or the courage to even give presenting a go.
Today's Presently Presents guest is a presenter, a multi-platform journalist and a producer who works for the BBC. She's a versatile journalist and a reporter who's passionate about creating content which reaches younger people and provides a voice for those who are underrepresented in the community. She's produced and presented content for students and also content on gaming. And she also presents and produces her very own sports show for Riverside Radio. And when she's outside of work, she could be found watching TV, cooking and going on some nice long walks. Today's Presently Presents guest is Kesewaa Browne. Hey Kesewaa, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really lovely to have you on. It sounds like you've been a really busy lady recently. As I said in my intro, you've got a lot of projects going on. What have you been up to at the moment?
Yeah, so I've just recently moved for work. So I'm working between Yorkshire and London at the moment. So, just getting over the move, which can be a bit stressful, as I'm sure you know. And at the moment, I'm working for a team called UK Insights that do investigations and also just original journalism for the BBC. But recently, I've started presenting a show on Riverside Radio, the Riverside Radio sports show. Riverside Radio is a community radio station that targets people, and the target audience is people in southwest London, so Wandsworth, Merton, Lambeth and Richmond, and we just kind of tailor our content to people in the surrounding area and put the community at the heart of it. So I've just been kind of getting to know the local community a bit better there and ensuring that, I get to speak to really exciting and interesting people who are doing great things in the sporting world of Wandsworth and southwest London.
That sounds really fun. And actually, I, just to go back, started my presenting career at when it used to be called Wandsworth Radio, so that's going back before they rebranded to Riverside with the lovely Jason. And for those, we've had quite a few people who on Presently who've asked us, how do I get into radio? And I always suggest Riverside as one of the places to go and do your own show, because it's such a good opportunity to kind of, they've got an audience, so you do kind of have listeners to present to. But how come sport? Is that something you're quite interested in?
Yeah, so I am quite interested in sport, but I've always toying between, staying in like news journalism and producing and like doing, reports here and there, or trying to transition into sports. But I think I've kind of come to the conclusion that I kind of like having sports as my hobby and doing my presenting on the weekend as, something that isn't tied to my work, because I do think it's so easy to just get sucked into work, which obviously is important. And, it is, you kind of do want to grind, you kind of do want to, progress, but also, your work isn't your entire identity. So I think for me, just ensuring that I kind of have a gap, or there is a difference between my day job and my presenting on the weekend and stuff, and just the bits I do here and there. I just felt like, do you know what, sport is a really big passion of mine. Why not see if I can do something in my spare time around sport? So yeah.
That's really nice. So it's more of like a passion project, which is really exciting. And yeah, it's kind of good, as you said, to have other interests. So it's cool that you're doing that. So with your day job, as you said, what does your average day look like right now in terms of creating content, creating reports, working for the BBC?
Yeah, so, with COVID, things have changed slightly. Before I was in the office 5 days a week before 2019. Now I probably go into the office twice a week. And, my day does change because I don't work in daily news at the moment. It's more investigations. I'll wake up, I'll come to work, I'll respond to emails, I'll make sure that, stories that I'm working on are tinkering over and that I'm doing bits, whether that's doing a little bit of producing, liaising with a contributor, and yeah, it really does change. Like even today, when I came into the office today, I was just speaking to another reporter who I'll be helping to produce soon for a shoot next week, and just the logistics of that, because I do shoot a little bit as well. So I'm just today, for example, I went into the office, I spoke with the reporter who I'm going to be assisting, co-producing with, getting the logistics, what camera should we use, what sort of, vibe are we going for with this report, what really is the crux of the story, and just kind of ensuring we have that on, we have that planned before we go out. And then also just working on other stories that I have on the back burner, liaising with other journalists who are working in hybrid working whilst I'm in the office today, and just ensuring that we've got everything in place for their stories to go forward. As a journalist, there are quite a couple of hoops you have to jump through first before a story gets on air, obviously to make sure it's accurate, fair, and just so it's the best possible it could be. So just a lot of planning does go into kind of the day job, and just to make sure that things are accurate, things are impartial, things are fair. I guess I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
I feel like
for
that
sure.
was me rambling.
No. It's really great to hear, and I think when you watch the final product on TV or you hear it on radio, it's quite hard as a viewer to really sort of grasp how much has gone into it. And I guess for you, these investigative pieces could be going on for a while. So how long is that process? So when you've had the idea and you've found people to work with on a project, whether you're producing or presenting it, how long is the kind of start to end sort of process?
Do you know what? It really varies. You referenced my gaming piece I did at the beginning. I feel like the gaming piece I did literally took me months, and it was only 5 minutes of me reporting, but it just took months because I shot that during a time last year where it was the middle of summer, but in the run-up to summer last year, obviously we had a lockdown from December to March time, and then with the restrictions still being in place. So that took me such a long time to shoot that gaming piece. And just for context, it was a gaming piece about a mother and daughter who created their own game with avatars that had afro hair. And because of, I filmed that for a tech show called Click. I reported on that for a tech show called Click. But because of the topic, and because it's like a magazine feature show, we had to kind of find a time where it would fit, because it was a gaming piece, and sometimes the show is every week, but sometimes the pieces will be about the reports will be about new pieces of technology, or new like sport technology. And there was a gaming conference, a very famous gaming conference called E3, which was happening in I think June last year. So we had to ensure that even though I sent over a pitch, I think maybe in November 2020, that didn't actually go on air till I think June 2021. So yeah, wow. It was a lot of time went into that specifically. So I used that as an example. But there was another time where, as a reporter / journalist, I was kind of really thrown into the deep end, where I turned up to work one day and they were like, okay, you've got to make an explainer in 3 days. And that was, film it using a green screen, using auto cue, and luckily there was someone else editing it. But it was just like, right, I've got to make sure all the information is correct due to the nature of the explainer, because it was on how university students could travel home, and this was during the end of 2020, so when students had just gone to university, but coronavirus cases were on the up, and universities in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England had different policies on what to do when leaving uni. So I had to call like the departments of education for all of them, for every single kind of nation, and just ensure that the facts were correct, because even though I was explaining it with my colleague, we were working on it together, it was still unsure. There were still question marks about what's going to happen. So it was just ensuring, that the information was 100% accurate, and that did take, even though it took 3 days, it was a lot of staying up, liaising with, people from different governments to ensure that what we said was correct, and also with our our in-house health team at the BBC. But yeah, that was completely different to the E3 example.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw that piece actually on your Instagram account, which was, as a student, I'm sure it was incredibly useful, but amazing to hear like how much research, fact checking, all of that goes into it. Obviously, I mentioned at the start that you're a multi-platform journalist, which I'm guessing means you do kind of sort of copy for the BBC. As you've said, you've presented different pieces, packages, reports. What exactly does that mean for those who are potentially interested in hearing more about what a multi-platform journalist is?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? That's a whole lot of jargon, isn't it, from me?
No.
Classic. I think sometimes you can be so insular with our jargon. It basically means that you can do different things. So it's not just, you don't just write for online. You can write for online. You can, edit digital videos. You can edit TV packages, or you can produce TV packages. So it just means that you're able to do multiple disciplines. But traditionally, I think back in the day, often journalists would just be kind of online journalists, or they'd just be kind of radio journalists. Whereas now, just I guess as budgets have got smaller and the world has evolved, you're expected to be able to do it all, which is hard.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it for a while, you sometimes forget things. Like I forget how to do things if I haven't done it for a while. And when I'm asked to do it, I'm like, oh, let me just try and engage my brain and make sure I can remember. But other things I do a bit more regularly, like editing videos or editing clips, or writing copy for presenters or online articles. And I did an English and drama degree, and I've always been very, I definitely feel like I'm definitely quite strong in writing. Ever since I was a child, I've always been writing. So writing always comes back naturally to me. It's something I still practice, regularly do. But sometimes the other things, so, if someone said to me tomorrow, you've got to do a report, even though I've recently just presented on Riverside Radio, if someone said to me in the workplace, you've got to do a report, I'd be like, oh gosh, because it isn't my full-time job. It's just I do it kind of as and when I can, and try to make sure I pitch ideas where I can, be in it or be the reporter. But also equally, I think it's important when you're not the right person to necessarily do something when it comes to news. Like I definitely feel much more comfortable sometimes with other reporters, or finding a member of the public who could be able to be like a contributor / presenter for something, rather than me doing it, because I do think it makes it a bit more engaging when the person you see has a personal link to the story. So I do think it is important to take a step back as well and be like, do you know what, it's probably best if someone else does this rather than me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess when you see those explainers or the pieces that you mentioned that you did, most people who are watching that might think that this is a presenter who's been hired for the BBC, without realizing that actually you're a multi-platform journalist who's writing scripts, editing videos, and the presenting is just one, small part of the whole thing that you do. And I see more and more jobs that come up now for self-shooting journalists who can go out there, present pieces to camera, film themselves, edit, and create the full package. That's really common, as you said, for various reasons. That's really normal, and it's not an easy task. So for you, how did you first get into it? Did you go in as a producer and then get offered presenting roles, or did you sort of train as a journalist?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely trained as a journalist. I did a 3-year English and drama degree. So, I'm quite extra. The drama side just came out. Do you know what I mean? I feel like when you're a drama student, you're a bit cheeky. You've got, confidence. So when I was at university, I started getting involved in the extracurricular activities. So I wrote for my university newspaper, magazine. I produced some very bad radio shows, which are terrible, I must add, absolutely dire.
We've all been there.
We've all been there. Even now, sometimes I listen back to things, I'm like, oh gosh, maybe I should re-record that. And I did some very bad one-off, actually. It was a one-off because I was like, oh, this is actually really hard. Presenting for the university TV show. So it was called, I think, Totty TV, and you essentially interviewed people on nights out.
Oh,
And
wow, that sounds amazing.
yeah, but it was hard, you know, because obviously the music is blaring really loud and you're like shouting. And then I always listen back and I'm like, that is actually awful. Like, I'm literally shouting, like, how are you? I mean, so I definitely think that helped listening back and be like, okay, I'm not going to do that again next time. So yeah, all these extracurricular things I was doing kind of made me realize, well, do you know what? Maybe journalism is the profession for me. My hobbies were kind of pointing towards this, and I've always been interested in speaking to people, and I always watched the news, and always felt like they don't. It doesn't. Even though I like watching the news, it does not really always focused on young people or people from diverse backgrounds. And I was like, you know what? I'm fed up. Maybe I can try and see what I can do. See if I can first get in and see if I can help tell these stories for these audiences, which I think a lot of people who are journalists say, and then we realise how naive we are. We still try, but we're not going to change. Just one of us isn't going to change the whole news cycle. But I definitely think it does help when you have people from different backgrounds and young people and people who are from outside of London. I think it does make a difference, slowly but surely. But I think when I first joined, I was like, oh, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to do that. And I was like, actually, no, that's not possible quite yet. Let me crawl first before I run. So when I finished my university degree, or in the run up to finishing my university degree, I saw there was a BBC journalism trainee scheme. That's basically kind of how I got into the BBC. And my job is a journalist, but it's not really. I think more and more now in job descriptions, to be fair, it does say there is opportunities where responsibilities, be able to report when it arises, sort of thing. But I'm a journalist, and I guess the only reason I've been able to do these reporting stuff and presenting stuff is because I've pitched those ideas, but also because I have amazing mentors who kind of encourage me to, this is what you can do to maybe progress your career. Try it, see if you like it, and if you don't, you don't. And I think that's kind of how I do my reporting. Is often I'll pitch the idea. It's never usually assigned to me. It's only been assigned to me, I think, once, and that was I guess because I'm a young journalist, and it was on students, and they wanted the people in the video who were reporting to resonate with the students, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I guess that was just luck. But the rest of the time, it has been me kind of pitching, and a lot of no's, which happens. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it's really not in my job description.
Emily here, and I'm interrupting this fascinating conversation, which I know can be irritating, but I wanted to ask you to do me a small favour that will help in a huge way. If you like this podcast, please subscribe now, wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google, or YouTube. Then leave a rating and a review. Every subscriber and every rating helps me to keep this podcast going. Thank you. And now back to our conversation. Do you think that your producing helps your presenting? So if you're presenting a piece like the piece you did for BBC Click on the tech stuff, if you've produced it yourself, do you feel more comfortable on camera?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're working with contributors as well, or if you're interviewing people, it just kind of helps with making them feel at ease too. So I definitely think, it's important to, if you can, take agency on those stories. And I do think it does help because you know it inside out, like the little ins and outs, what to do, or, I think it just I think it does help, yeah. But equally, you can't always do that. Sometimes you are producing other people about a story that maybe you're really passionate about, and that's okay. That's just part of my job. So yeah.
It's still a really interesting part of it as well, in terms of being an all-rounder and learning about the industry. I think sometimes if you're helping other presenters, it makes you realize what you need to do, in fact, or if you're kind of teaching them and guiding them through it. So do you ever get nervous? Because obviously you've done lots of pieces to camera now. How do you feel when you're on camera? Do you feel quite relaxed, or is it still quite a kind of, for a lot of people when they start, it's quite a weird process?
I definitely think it is a bit strange. I think as well, depending on, you know, the mood of the story, or depending on what you're presenting, because you could be presenting something really fun, like an award show or something like that, and that's a lot more lighter. But if it's something a bit more serious, then it is a bit like, oh, you know, I've got to make sure that I'm not smiling too much, or, you know, and I think it's so easy as well just to pick apart your appearance too. I definitely think when I did my first ever bit of presenting or reporting for the BBC, I was like, oh no, it looks really bad. But I think one thing that has definitely helped me when it comes to feeling more at ease is I have amazing mentors that have kind of, you know, if it wasn't for my mentors, I don't think I would have had the confidence or the courage to even give presenting a go. And often in the run up, you know, to things, they would say, okay, how about we script this, you know, or this is what you could do to become a bit more natural, or, you know, let's take a story off the website, or let's take a story, what sort of TV script would you write for it? And I think that definitely helps, having that forward planning, and also just, you know, I guess it makes me cringe a bit, but just looking back at past pieces and maybe I could do this a bit different here, thinking to yourself, maybe I could have done this, or maybe I could have, you know, stood a bit differently, or maybe I could have asked the contributor a different question. I think it is a bit nerve-wracking still, and I think, you know, it's a process, it's still learning, you know. Even though I feel old, I have to tell myself I've only just turned 26, so, you know, I'm not going to be super seasoned as of yet, as someone who has someone's been doing this for a while. I haven't been doing this for very long, so it's just about, you know, not being too hard on myself, and also just, you know, maybe looking at ways you can improve, but also giving yourself credit for things that could have gone well, or that you feel have gone well too.
Oh, that's such good feedback. Yeah, I think watching yourself back, as cringy as it is, and also, you know, when you start a radio show, I'm sure you found this, hearing your own voice, you have to get used to that very quickly, and it can be quite unpleasant at the start, but I couldn't agree more. There are things that you do as a presenter which you have no idea until you've watched back. That's what you do. It's just these fine-tuning moments throughout your career, depending what style you're doing. As you said, you could be doing entertainment, and that's a lot brighter than doing news. But yeah, so I think like doing what you're doing is the perfect way to do it, and finding a mentor as well. No one's actually mentioned that on the podcast so far. How did you do that? Was that someone at your workplace?
Yeah, so that was someone at my workplace. I remember I asked them a question one time, just in relating to where they work, the team they work for, and then we had a call on Zoom. And then they were like, okay, so just out of curiosity, like, what are your goals? And I said, you know, these are my goals for the year. And then she was like, you know, do you want me to be your friend or like mentor sort of thing? And I
love that, friend tour.
Yeah,
that's so
because,
nice.
you know, my mentor is my friend, but she's also, you know, my mentor too. And, you know, recently, because even though I haven't spoken to them on a mentor level recently, just because they've been very busy and killing it themselves, you know, and they're now a senior reporter at the BBC. And at the time they weren't, they were a journalist too, and they'd just gone freelance. So to kind of, I guess, build themselves up as a reporter. And, you know, the fact that since I started speaking to them, you know, 2 years ago, going from being, you know, freelance reporter to now, going from like a journalist / freelance reporter to senior journalist reporter, it's just amazing. Do you know what I mean? So I do think, and I know that for my friend/mentor, that they get a lot of help from their mentors too, and their mentors support them, and they're not even necessarily on screen reporters or presenters. They're producers as well, they're camera people, and I think it's important to have a mentor that isn't necessarily just, you know, it's good to have a mentor or a friend-tor who works in the field of what you want to do, but also I think it's quite useful to have one who maybe is, you know, works in lighting or something like that, because, you know, they've seen things over the years and they could give you advice as well, or maybe, I know it sounds silly, but even what to wear, maybe things that maybe suit you, or things that you won't blend into the green screen or look a bit strange on camera. I think it's important to, you know, to have that perspective too. And I think even if I have mentors who aren't even necessarily work in journalism, they work in other creative fields, but it's just so useful to have them there as, you know, what do you think of this idea, or, you know, what do you think I should do about this particular issue I have? I think, you know, if possible, having a mentor or friend-tor is, you know, so vital for growth, and just, you know, also holding you accountable and making sure, okay, you said you want to do this, are you actually going to put in the work to do this? Or maybe that's not, you know, maybe we should think about doing this first before we do this, or, you know, maybe that time frame is unrealistic, sort of thing. And I definitely think that confidence, or having someone who just kind of tells you you're able to do things and it's your mind that's playing tricks on you, has just done wonders for me. I think I wouldn't be, you know, the person I was or where I am in my career, even though I'm only 4 years in. I don't think I would be there if it wasn't for people who advocated for me, and people who, you know, who flagged opportunities to me, or have said, why don't you try this? Do you know what I mean? Or people who've just listened. Sometimes listening is just amazing too, but I definitely don't think, you know, some of the people we see on screen who are just, you know, killing it and very entertaining, very fun, I feel like they're doing that, but I'm sure they have people in their corner as well, you know, in the wings, who are giving them that confidence too and encouraging them. And I think that does, you know, when you believe you can do something, or when you kind of have the courage to do something, I feel like you're already partway there. And I definitely owe, you know, being able to do what I do to my mentors and my friend-tors.
That's really, really lovely advice. Yeah. And I think there are various mentoring schemes out there. So I can't remember them off the top of my head, but if anyone's listening and they're interested, you can Google sort of, you know, presenter, journalist, mentor scheme, things like that, which are a bit more of an official process. You apply, and they might be quite a big name in the industry, but obviously it's quite competitive. So if that's not an option, finding, as you said, people who you in your workplace, people who are friends, or in slightly other avenues. Such great advice. As I said, it's not been mentioned on the podcast before, so I think that's like a really new and essential piece of advice that you've given today, which is great. And I suppose a big part of it is being prepared for criticism, which is something that you learn to kind of get on with. It's not that normal in other industries to be constantly fed, you know, feedback like we do in this industry. And I think I've got to the point now that if I haven't had feedback in a while, I start to kind of twitch, because I just need to know, you know, how's it going, and how we're doing as a team or as an individual. How do you find getting criticism from your mentors? Do you kind of accept it? Does it ever get to a point where you feel a bit kind of deflated afterwards, or do you kind of just take on the challenge?
Do you know what? I think it's a mixture. I remember once I was very defensive looking back. At the time, I didn't think it was defensive. Or I just kind of was like, do you mind just explaining a bit more? Because I just disagree, sort of thing. And I feel like, you know, I was like, should I have done that? And when I spoke to, you know, another mentor about just, you know, what should I do if I disagree with what someone says, sort of thing. Obviously, it's advice. And they were like, it's okay to disagree, or, you know, as long as you kind of do it in a respectful way, sort of thing. And, you know, they're obviously not going to be the, like, kind of like a godlike voice, if that makes sense. You know, they're just going to give you advice or say their opinions and stuff. And if you disagree, then you can. But I definitely think after I was very defensive one time, I'm like, do you know what? Let me just take everything else with a pinch of salt. Do you know what I mean? Like, there isn't. And I think as well, sometimes you can see it as the end of the world, and it really isn't. Do you know what I mean? I think it's just important to kind of take that criticism. But also it's difficult because you don't want to get too stuck into, oh, because this one person criticized me about this one thing, I'm terrible, I'm a terrible person, I'm bad, blah, blah, blah. I do think it's important that you kind of balance it out and don't look into it too much, in the sense of, you know, don't let it weigh on your mind too much if it's bringing you down. I know it's easier said than done, but just, you know, okay, this has been said to me, this is what I can maybe do going forward. Do you know what I mean? But I do think it's easier said than done. But yeah, I definitely think there's been one, I'm thinking of one time where I was a bit like, oh gosh, and I did feel a bit bad actually. I did I'm just like, I hope it hasn't come across as rude, as disrespectful, because it is, like these are relationships, like you have relationships with your friends and family, and you can disagree with things sometimes, but it's all about, I guess, being respectful, do you know what I mean, and just, yeah. And I feel similar to you in the sense of I think I like being criticised every couple of months, constructive criticism, because if you're not getting it, it's like, oh no. And when I speak to my friends or my partner who works in a completely different industry, who works in like HR or finance, they're like, no, that's not, like, we never really get told stuff like as often. And I'm like, that's just so wild to me. And I'm like, maybe I prefer it, but I'm not sure.
So you said that you've been working on content that you think is important for providing a voice for young people and also those who are underrepresented in the community. What kind of projects would you like to work on going forward? Have you had any ideas recently where you're like, oh, I'm really passionate about that?
Yes, I've had a couple, but I'm not sure if I'm able to say.
Oh, top secret.
But I definitely think, I like working on projects that kind of are young people issues, or stuff that, affect young people or people from, underserved backgrounds. I think for me that kind of thrives me and pushes me to kind of do my journalism, especially when it comes to the producing side. And I definitely think when it comes to the presenting side, like, I love being able to find people for, community radio who may not necessarily be on, radio, or may not have even considered it. Really, I'm interesting enough. I like finding people like that, people who we maybe haven't heard from, just because I think it's nice. I mean, we haven't heard those voices, and I think it's important that we hear them. So yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I think there's not enough news. Obviously, there's Newsround, which you've worked for, where that's really tailor-made content for little children, and it's so nice. I used to watch Newsround. I'm sure a lot of us did when we were growing up, and I used to love watching the presenters and the way that they deliver stories. It's really important for children, but it almost feels like there is a gap of those sort of younger people and people who don't feel represented in news and just in general in the media. So I think it's really cool that you're going out there and finding stories and opportunities to kind of connect with those people and for them to hear stories that sort of resonate with them more. Is that something you want to keep focusing on going forward? And kind of where do you see yourself in the next 5 years, should we say?
Yeah. I would like to continue doing that going forward, but equally, I love writing so much, and I love TV so much. I would love to throw my hat at writing like a comedy. I would love to do that. That's kind of my passion project. In 5 years, I hope I'm still doing stuff on community radio. I feel like, some people obviously, for community radio, it's their springboard into, like global, LBC, Radio 1 Extra. But I definitely would love to continue doing community radio. I obviously wouldn't say, I don't know, if an opportunity came up, I'm not sure if it would, but if an opportunity came up to do something, I guess on a national level, I would, I'd love that. But equally, I love community radio so much. I love just the crux of it. So I see myself still doing, my community radio bits.
That's really cool. It sounds like you're a really creative person, and it's great that you've got so many strings to your bow, and you're a multi-platform journalist, and you can do all kinds of different things. So it's really exciting. Where can we follow you online? So on Instagram and Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, so on Instagram it is at KESSSYB, so at Kessie B.
Nice.
And on Twitter it's a bit different. It is at KB_ROWNE, and I did that on Twitter. I didn't want to be too discoverable because of trolls. So I just decided, yeah, my name before used to be my name, but I was like, do you know what, I kind of wanted to be a bit more difficult to find me in case people troll me. And
that's a good technique, actually.
And I would say as well, if you are concerned about that, I mean, I sometimes have my tweets on just people who unless I follow them, they can't respond to my tweets sort of thing, because I'm like, oh, do you know what, there is a bit of trolling sometimes that comes with journalism, so I'm just like, do you know what, I don't want to be dealing with this on my 8 p.m. on a Sunday in my personal time. Do you know what I mean?
No, fair enough.
So, yeah.
That's a really good tip. Yeah, that's a really good tip. But don't worry, no one from here will be trolling you. So.
I know you're all lovely. You're all lovely people.
Yeah,
so.
you're safe with us.
Yeah.
Well, Kesewaa, I can't wait to follow your updates and see, your new reports on really interesting topics and see you presenting as well. And also, I'll try and tune into your Riverside show. When is that? What day?
So it's on Saturdays from 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. So it's the sports show.
3 hour.
Yeah, so it is. We do take it in turns, like rotation, and there is a main presenter, and then there's also people who kind of chirp in, like they're kind of, I guess, secondary presenters or reporters sort of thing. But there is like a main presenter kind of keeping things cool, calm, and collected. But I'm not cool, calm, and collected. I'm freaking. I'm like, have I pressed the right button?
Yeah, it takes a while, doesn't it, to get used to the technical side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so that's 3 till 6, and you can, find that through the Riverside Radio website, or if you're in the area, through DAB.
Lovely. Very, very nice. Well, Kesewaa, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I feel like you've offered us some really lovely advice. Hopefully people listening can go and take away some of those bits for their own careers and self-development, and that's such a big part of it now. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you on.
Thank you.